Well, good afternoon. My name is Joe Kramer. I'm with the Michigan Bean Commission, and as several of you know, many people know, we've had a series of grower meetings over the past few years that were always held in the month of December, but because we weren't able to meet in person, we think it's still important to try to bring market information to growers and just see what the attitude of the market is and try to share that a little bit. So Matt Stawowy from Steele and Company, based in Sterling, Michigan, was kind enough to spare me a few minutes today to just bring me up to speed a little bit. And I'm going to let Matt talk and introduce himself, fire a few questions at us, but trying to do this maybe once a month. So we did our first one last December, and here we are, first full week of January in the new year, and just wanted to do a little check-in with Matt and see how things are going. So Matt, why don't you, if you don't mind, introduce yourself to the people that are going to view this and listen to this, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about the current crop and then move toward new crop for the next 15 minutes or so.
All right. Hey, Joe, nice to see you today. Pleasure to be with you. Yeah, as you indicated, I'm a trader with Steele and Company. I think most of the Michigan folks, I guess, probably have seen me around. But yeah, pleasure to be with you today, and we'll get going here.
Thanks, Matt. We, you've attended the grower meeting in Pinconning. We call that our Central Michigan or Northern Michigan grower meeting every December. I think you've given the market report there the last 3 or 4 years. Always throw some nice slides up for us and kind of track that supply demand. But by the end of the day, the growers are really curious. They always try to put you on the spot as to where do you think the market's going and where are we headed. So my role here today is to put you on the spot again. We're going to try to peg you down before we hang up, but in the meantime, I guess talk to us a little bit. We got a crop report coming out next Tuesday that will be our first look at a breakdown by class, and if the USDA is going to adjust yield in Michigan or anywhere else in the country, that we think that report would reflect maybe a yield adjustment. I just don't know if it's up or down, and I got as many people telling me up as I do down. So right. What are you thinking? What's the temperature in the trade today relative to supply and demand?
Well, as far as the trade goes, I mean, we're really in a spectacular time. I don't think, I mean, to put it simply, the market's pretty hot right now. I don't think that if we were to rewind, 9, 10 months, I don't think, or certainly 12 months, I don't think that we anticipated having as much demand and certainly as much supply to begin with as we did. And then when it became evident we had a potential for a huge supply, increased acres over the year prior, I think we all, at least on the marketing side of things, maybe even began to get a little nervous about the crop that we might struggle with and where we might go with it. Fast forward 12 months and put 9 months of COVID in the mix. And, I think we're actually in a pretty good shape for where we could have been. To back up all the way to the beginning, I guess we did increase acres by pretty large percentage in some cases,
right?
25 or 30% in some classes, and 50% in a few classes. And we had a pretty good year.
When you look at this current situation, and you talk about a hot market, is it across all the classes, or right? Does it matter if I'm a kidney bean guy or a black bean guy or a red bean guy?
Right now, it really doesn't. It seems that most all of these markets are trading pretty steadily. Some classes, maybe the demand is a bit more overwhelming than others. And that was a result of a few different factors. But, to take, I guess, the one that's probably on most people's minds here in Michigan would be the black beans.
Right.
That surprisingly, the acres in the summer production report or the summer planting report, didn't show the black bean acres in particular to be up, I guess, as much as maybe we had initially thought would be.
Right.
Having said that, we had a respectable growing season in most of the area, and yields seem to be pretty decent. I don't know, maybe early anticipation, I guess, was maybe a bag or two better than average.
Right. Right.
And we were worried about demand, but we've been fortunate since we started getting beans at the dump. The most of the new demand has come from the international market.
Hmm.
Our domestic users covered early, but our international buyers have really embraced.
That's kind of interesting, isn't it? The little different viewpoint. How how when you talk about supply demand, sitting in your chair, obviously, no matter who you are, if you're involved in the bean industry today, you got to think about the Mindac production region. If you're a pinto guy or a black bean guy or a navy bean guy, they weigh in heavily or have a big influence. And I'm like you, I was a little nervous coming into harvest as to if this all shows up, where are we going to put it all? Where are we going to get rid of it all? And it just hasn't been an issue. How are things in Mindac? Do they look like us?
Generally speaking, Joe, they do. There was some concerns, I guess, on the onset of harvest or late in the growing season, brought about by some frost in certain production regions, and I think there was some conventional wisdom early on that was really going to have a hard impact on the crop out there. More so, probably in pintos, but certainly in blacks as well.
Mhm.
But I think as we've gotten a little bit further out past the harvest, it's become a little more clear that some of those areas that were damaged the hardest, those were relatively regional, more so affecting the central, the western production regions, which certainly there's a notable bean production out there. But up and down the valley, other than some isolated and smaller pockets that were impacted, um, they also had experienced a pretty respectable harvest, tremendous yields on some of the initial reports.
Wow.
But that settled into maybe what would be anticipated to be a bag or two above average. And quality, I think, in general is fair. I mean, again, certainly some frost damaged beans in some areas, but it's regional. It's regional.
When I look at the Michigan assessment reports and have the ability to see those come in, and we put out that monthly report that says I think we're going to be creeping up on 80% bought in here in Michigan. I sort of feel like the Mindac region is close to that. They've moved pretty well through the exchange of ownership from grower to dealer, and I don't sense that there's a lot of long or shorts out there to feed the market. As you put that puzzle together, and here we sit on the 8th of January, we got a long ways to go to our next harvest. And you and I happened to speak yesterday, and we talked about the availability of offers of small reds and black beans to some degree. I think light reds have been a little on the tight side as well. I guess I'm a little bit concerned about how we get from mid-January to harvest. We went through this to some degree last year, but we're easily 2 or 3 months ahead of that, right? We've got a longer period of time to cover here. I just wondered how is the trade reacting to that? Is it simply price will ration demand?
Oh, I think to a large extent, yes. I think having that said, it's also I think important to remember, or I guess to be mindful of the fact that from the domestic usage standpoint and the domestic end users perspective, I think the majority of these folks they're also probably ahead on their traditional purchases. So we do have a long marketing season ahead, but perhaps not as much of that needs to be. Much of it might be committed already. So these
So
guys.
we have a long period of time to ship beans. That doesn't necessarily mean we've got a whole lot of trading left to do either. We could have 80% of the trading done.
Well, and then I guess that's what I'm thinking. I certainly feel that, and it's of course only time will tell. But I certainly
Yeah.
feel like we could have a little bit slower late spring and summer in terms of actual trade activity
You
as
mentioned,
we work to move these contracts out the door.
yeah, you mentioned earlier about the opportunity to trade into the international market, the export world. When we spoke yesterday, we both were talking a little bit about Brazil and some news, some sort of headlines coming out of Brazil that they're looking at a small crop or a delayed crop. Not necessarily specific to Brazil, but as a general feeling about the international markets, as we go forward, do you think they look different than what we just talked about with the domestic markets who have a fair amount of coverage? Do you think in other words, do you think there's some gaps in that international trade that will push on this thing yet?
Well, I think there's some windows of opportunity. I might suggest. There was we've seen some buzz about the industry, I guess, of maybe Brazil coming in with their first crop of the year at what might be considered to be a near record low or a record small crop, which could be concerning and could open up some opportunities here. Although we'll have another crop in March coming in, and then Argentina will be into the market in May and June. So I think that it's possible that we'll see a few windows of opportunity there, but I don't know that I don't necessarily feel that we're going to be the only game in town between now and August. There will be others back to the market.
Right. Well, I was curious about that. We had a GPC session. When was that? Back in December, and early December, I think, and maybe even late November. But at that time, we know that Argentina historically takes care of Brazil, and they were going to be out of beans about now, it looked like on paper, and their next harvest, like you said, is May. So we've got I agree with you. I think we do have some windows of opportunity. I'm not sure quite how all those pieces will fit together. And I sort of think that our processors want to take care of their regular customers, and they need to have some pretty hard conversations about where are you at and what do you need from me before they drift off into this new world that only happens once or twice every 10 years, let's say.
Certainly. It's ironic you say that, because we're having some of those discussions with some of our international customers right now relative to maybe not necessarily the blacks in particular, but the classes like the kidney beans and things of nature that are already tight. The conversation is precisely that. We're going to have some opportunities to move what little bit of inventory remains. What do you need to get you through to your next crop, be it from the US or Canada or Argentina? So excellent point.
Matt, let's roll the clock forward a little bit here. So growers are making decisions. They're looking ahead at what should I be planting. We all have access to that nasty Chicago Board of Trade. It's actually a great opportunity for growers, but it makes it tough for a dry bean guy like you and I to try to maintain those acres. And I guess I'm just curious about how that's looking. I know there's some contracts out there that at least at one point look like pretty decent values, but that current crop soybean market continues to move, and corn's been aggressive. So I guess I'm just wondering how, sitting at a trader's desk, what is that conversation looking like on a daily basis? And if you're a grower, is time your friend, or do you have some deadlines that you need to pay attention to? What's going on there?
Well, certainly it's not a bad time to be a grower. You're looking at some pretty good opportunities in a lot of different directions. and your options are kind of wide open right now. So I guess to your first point, it does make it challenging in a seat like ours to get growers excited to put in beans when they can contract $11 soybeans today,
Right.
or maybe even higher values depending on the outlet that you're working with. So it does make the conversation a little bit more difficult. Having said that, to your later point about is time your friend, I don't think there's any rush if a producer isn't necessarily um, needing to show a contract to a lending institution. Then I don't know that I would be afraid to at least I wouldn't turn my back on the beans, although I may not rush forward to sign it just yet. There might be
a little patience might be good.
it may pay off. Having said that, and to the point, to the backing up, I guess, to yesterday's discussion when you and I had an opportunity to visit, we talked about the fact that time may be on your side here, but at the same time, the contract values that we've had out on and off, I suppose. The most recent I'd heard was 35 navies, 33 blacks. These also aren't bad values. If
Right.
this is if you do need to put something on the books to help out leveraging your cash for spring operations, these certainly aren't values to be ashamed of. If you need to do something to cover your.
We've seen worse, haven't we?
We've seen worse, and as you put it to me yesterday, if $35 navies is your worst sale, that's you're in good shape.
Not a bad place to start. I get a chance to talk to several growers, and I'm fascinated when they're very professional for the most part about looking at their cost of production and really understanding that, and they plug in a factor, if you will, for the added risk that goes along with planting dry beans versus a soybean, for example. It looked to me on paper like if an $11 soybean and a $35 navy bean, from a dry bean perspective, to me, the favor went to the $35 navy bean. But growers also have long range vision for where that soybean market might be headed and where the dry bean market might be headed. I've always believed that when the soybean market tips over, it tips over pretty hard, and the same can happen in dry beans. But I think everybody would really like to understand what's the upside potential of either one of those things before they really get serious about putting ink on paper. So more to follow there, I guess. But is the canner, the canner or the packager that you're talking to on a daily basis, whether it be domestic or offshore, they're pretty cognizant of what these Chicago prices are doing?
Well, to some extent, yes. I mean, they're cognizant of it primarily because we're having those discussions with them and kind of trying to illustrate to them, the challenges that we're going to face. As from the end user's perspective, and from your days of sitting in the trading chair, you'll probably recall it's difficult to convince an end user that it might be the right time to think about taking some coverage when we're at what have seemed to be high values by comparison to the recent past.
Yeah.
So there's always a reluctance, there's always a hope and I guess an expectation that at the onset of harvest and the beginning of the shipping season, there's another opportunity where pricing may offer a benefit, and that may happen as well. But yeah, so I guess it's a discussion that we're having. I don't know that at this point, at least from our perspective, from my own perspective, we've not really got into the big contracting time frame. The discussion start about now, and we begin to see more of those contracts coming together in the February, March timeframe. But I mean, we need to keep everybody informed of what's going on so that we can all make our decisions accordingly.
We chatted a little bit yesterday about that relationship between MnDOT and Michigan, and it depends on where you're sitting as to what that freight differential might look like delivered to your cannery or your packaging facility. And I always like to at least keep that in mind, that there is a rubber band between us, right? It's not a solid chain that hitches our pricing together, but we can't get too far apart. And I'm always nervous about influencing acres through pricing to a MnDOT region. We saw it move toward Ontario when the 25% tariffs came into play a couple of years ago. I'm sure you're having those conversations pretty regular as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Matt, I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. We may check back in with you in a month or two and see if anything's changed. COVID is hopefully on the downside. I don't know if you've been able to get a vaccine yet or not, but I think it's in all of our future if we want it. And stay healthy, and the best to your family in this new year. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I appreciate you reaching out. Pleasure as always. And by all means, I'll be happy to sit down and bring an update again at a future time.
Thanks, Matt. Take care.
Take care, Joe.